I've created a movie clip of this gold circle, and we can see in the properties that it is in fact a movie clip. And I'm going to just simply close up a couple of these categories so that you can see the filters category a little bit better. We're going to apply some filters to this movie clip. At the bottom of the filters area are some buttons, and the first one on the far left allows me to add a filter. And if you worked with Photoshop, you're very familiar with filters. We have a much smaller selection of filters in Flash than we do in Photoshop. First one here is to be able to add a drop shadow. You'll see a little shadow coming in on that instance, and I can also affect how that shadow is applied. I can blur it more or less, either in the X or Y directions, and if I break the link between X and Y, I can blur X and Y separately. I can also modify the strength. I could change the angle. So maybe I want the shadow to come to, let's say, the upper left. And I can also change the distance that the shadow is from the object itself. There's also a checkbox here for I can knock out the object and leave just the shadow. Or I can produce the shadow as an inner shadow inside the object. Or I can simply just hide the object and retain the shadow. I can also change the color of the shadow. Maybe I want to make it more of a maroon. Okay, there's a little drop down arrow here on the drop shadow, so I can hide all of the properties of that drop shadow. If I want to get rid of the drop shadow, there is a trash can. I can delete it. There's also a button here in the center that allows me to disable that filter. So I'm just going to disable it for now. And let's look at another filter. Here's the blur filter. This will actually blur the object itself. And again, I can blur both X and Y together, or I could break the link and blur them separately. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. Let's add another filter. This one's the glow. So here I can have a glow that's going out in all directions. A little different from the shadow, which is really being cast in one direction. But I also do things like knock out or make it an inner glow. And I can change the color. I'm going to disable that one. There's a gradient glow in which the glow will use a gradient instead of a fill color. So I might have this gradient go from green to red. And you can't see what I just did there because it went outside the area that I'm recording. But it's sort of like creating a linear gradient in the color panel. And now I can bring the blurs up. And you can see that red to green gradient. Okay, so I'm going to select that one and delete it. Let's go back and look at the bevel. So in the bevel, again, I can blur it, I can change the quality, I can change the strength, and I can choose the shadow and highlight area for that bevel effect, as well as the angle. And there are different types of bevels. So there's an inner bevel. We can also have an outer bevel and a full bevel, which is going to do both inner and outer. And I can change the colors here as well. and go back to an outer bevel or an inner bevel. And once again, I'm going to select that effect and delete it. The gradient bevel basically does the same thing. We're using gradients rather than fill colors, solid colors. And then the last one here is adjust color. So here I can alter the brightness, either making it darker or lighter. I can also enter a value from the keyboard for any of these. I can change the contrast, and I can change the saturation. And then I can change the hue itself. And I'm going to select that one and delete it. To be honest, the primary filters that I would use would be drop shadow, maybe blur, maybe glow. Once in a great while I might use a bevel. I can't recall ever using adjust color. I would probably do that through the color effects. But we can mix and match these. Right now these are both turned off as far as visibility. I can select them and make them visible, or I can have more than one effect being applied. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete both of these effects. So I'm back with just my object. I'm going to draw another color circle. This is not a movie clip or a button or a graphic. It's not a symbol, it's just a graphics that's colored. I'm going to place my symbol on top of that. So the next thing I want to look at is blending modes. In the display area, we have a drop down for blending modes. Now again, if you've used Photoshop, you're familiar with blending modes, and we don't have quite as many here as we do in Photoshop, but the main ones are basically here. So with this object, I'm going to adjust the blending mode, which means it's going to affect how it looks against the stuff underneath. So if I choose to darken, we'll see the overlapping area, that part of my instance is being affected by the color underneath it. In this case, it's taking whatever the highest value is of the red, green, and blue channels and creating a new color. Each of these blending modes are mathematically oriented. Multiply is also going to darken, but because the mathematics are a little bit different, it's going to give me a slightly different color. Very subtle. There's also a choice here to lighten that overlapping area. Now in this case, it's going to take the higher value of the red, green, and blue channels, and so the white background behind the object is going to cause it to go white, but here the overlapping area is going to incorporate some of the red, green, and blue values from the circle that is underneath. There's an overlay. There's a hard light. And then we do things like add, subtract, and find the difference. So the difference, we're looking at the difference between the two different colors there, the circle underneath and the overlapping instance, and creating a new color for that overlapped area. I can invert, basically getting a negative. I can choose the alpha, and I could erase it altogether. I don't use blending modes a whole lot in Flash, but they're there. Let me just bring in a couple of bitmap graphics, and you can see the effect maybe a little bit better. So I'm going to import to the library. I'm going to go to my pictures area and bring in a couple images. Okay, so in my library are these two images that I brought in. I'm going to take the Monument Valley one and put it on my stage. Now it's huge, so I'm just going to scale it down. And I'll make it a little smaller than the stage so you can kind of see the effect here. And now I'm going to take this image of the crocuses, basically do the same thing, just going to scale it down. And we'll have these two overlap. Okay, so back in the properties, I'm going to select this graphic and I'm going to turn it into a symbol. We'll make it a movie clip. I'm going to call it MC Crocuses. And now I get all the effects available to me in terms of blending and filters. I'm going to take this blending and let's just choose darken. And you can see how the two kind of merge together, almost like a collage. Multiply. I can make it lighter. So I can begin to have these two images interact with each other somehow. You can create some kind of cool animated effects using images and adjusting the blending modes. Again, I don't use blending modes very much, but sometimes they do come in handy. One area, for instance, let me demonstrate this. Let's say I have some text, and let's say I want to highlight the word South Mountain. So I'm just going to take a brush and I'm going to add another layer here, just keep these separated for now. Let's take a larger brush, and my brush color is going to be a yellow. And I'm just going to basically drag through like I was highlighting with the highlighter. I didn't want a perfect rectangle, so that's why I used a brush here. Now I'm going to take that color and I'm going to convert that into a movie clip. I'm going to call it MC Highlight. And I'm going to adjust the blending mode of that to choose whatever the darker color is. Either darken or multiply. And there's the effect of having that highlighted. I could actually, if I wanted, animate this to look like somebody's drawing this out. And just to demonstrate that, I'm going to take my text. We'll do a really short animation. I'm going to insert a frame to extend that down. I'm going to insert a keyframe here. On this keyframe, I'm going to move my pivot point and just kind of roll that up. And on this keyframe, just take this pivot point, put it in the same spot. And I'm going to create a classic tween here. And now if I were to run this, you can see the effect of that highlighter being dragged over top that text. We'll talk much more about animation in the next few weeks, but that is how I might use a blending mode in an animation.